So in our previous videos, we looked at the Industrial Revolution, what industrialization was, and then talked about site and situation factors. Now we're going to put this together to understand why industry has been moving around the globe lately and how it connects to lower labor costs, access to new markets, and resources. So we want to understand this idea here known as outsourcing because it gets thrown around a lot, especially in this era of globalization, for why factory jobs have moved abroad and why they are not necessarily returning in high numbers to parts of the globe, including within the United States. So our definition of outsourcing is having production or jobs that are done by an outside firm or by another firm outside the country by transnational companies because labor or production is cheaper, despite the fact that it will oftentimes increase the transportation costs. So remember that we talked about transportation costs with situation factors, access to the market or access to your inputs. This takes the idea that the transportation costs are not as important as is the actual cost of producing those goods abroad or having the work done because it becomes cheaper in terms of labor costs. So those are things to really be considering here. All right, so some examples: car manufacturing and call centers outside the United States for people that are going to be buying cars in the United States or using those tech support lines. Okay. This also connects to what we call the new international division of labor. Now, what this refers to is the movement of those jobs that we're talking about here, oftentimes outsourced, by companies or countries to keep that high-skilled jobs or to move those high-skilled jobs into developed countries, keeping the high-skilled jobs in developed countries and moving the lower-skilled jobs to the developing parts of the globe. So that means that, again, ideas such as, call centers and car manufacturing aren't necessarily considered high-skilled, and so what they do is they move those abroad because that lowers the cost of what it actually takes to make said product or provide that service. All right, as we will see a couple of examples here later on. This also connects to the idea of development in terms of what do we consider to be important and where do we consider it to be done, and how does this connect to where the money and revenue is coming from for certain countries, especially if you keep the most high-paid, expensive jobs or considered the most skilled within your own country, but give out the lower-income jobs to the developing world. How does that actually help with development? What limitations are there? What are the benefits with both the developed countries and also the developing countries? Okay. These are also what we consider to be the opposite of what we call vertical integration, which was done very heavily in the late 1800s, early 1900s by a lot of American businesses to essentially keep everything in-house to limit competition, but also to limit the costs. So this is when a company would control all phases of production and make their own products, which is no longer really all that cost effective. So, here's the example here. I usually use it with U.S. history with the idea of vertical integration. So some current examples would be restaurants that grow or supply their own food, Netflix making their own original content rather than, taking it from other companies, or, using Target with the Market Pantry or other Target brand products that are just sold at Target. That's considered all within the ideas of vertical integration. Now you see less and less of this, but it still does exist, even though it was much bigger later on. But because of cost, they figure it's just actually easier to buy from other people or other companies. So within call centers and understanding this is more about a tertiary or service job sector, because again, think information technology, supporting, internet or, other usage within that. And this is, I think, from about the mid-2010s. We spend over $300 billion on, contact service centers. And I think a lot of that's actually being changed, especially now that we're going to more automated systems where it's really, really hard to talk to a person sometimes, which can be infuriating. But this seems to be the direction that a lot of companies are going with. All right. So a lot of that money is spent for in-house operations, while again, about a fifth to a fourth is spent on outsourcing. And that has grown annually over the years. Okay, this is consistent with annual budget cuts, challenges for customer services, and increasing contact volumes have led to the increased outsourcing as they need more people to support it, but try and spend less money on it. Okay, so in terms of call center jobs, who has lost the most are in the red states, who has gained the most, and again, this goes back to about 2010-ish within there. Okay, so you see states where they're growing, but also states where they're losing jobs too. Okay. So in terms of the outsourcing numbers, and we'll get back to this blue one here, I'll cover that up here quick. So jobs displaced due to trade deficits with Mexico. So where do we lose a lot of jobs to Mexico? Okay, a lot of it's going to come back to car manufacturing, as we'll see here with maquiladoras and NAFTA, or the first version of NAFTA, and the new one is just pretty much the same thing without being called it. So you can kind of see where has that number really decreased as a result. So Minnesota, we're kind of, in that middle area. Some states didn't get hit so bad, but, again, Michigan, Indiana, a lot of the, industry belt or manufacturing belt are now considered the Rust Belt. It has done very, very poorly. Where have a lot of those jobs gone? Well, this is between 1999 and 2009. Okay, we added 2.9 million jobs overseas while cutting almost 1 million back home. So a difference of about 4 million jobs inside the United States. Okay, and so you can kind of see, where have they gone? A lot to Mexico. Okay, a lot definitely to China, South Korea. And these are by percentages, so not actually total numbers within the percentages. But then you can also see the total numbers there. Almost 1 million jobs to Mexico, 500,000 to Brazil, another 500,000 to France, UK over 1 million. And then adding in where's India, 500,000, China, 1 million. So you can kind of see the differences here. So of 561 companies that were surveyed, 74% they outsourced work to countries abroad, with India being 35% of jobs in programming, back office management, so that would again be accounting services and things of that nature, and then some customer service jobs there. So yeah, very, very high amounts within that, and that was about 2015 is what that number came from. And this one, can't see it from the U.S. Business Bureau or United States Bureau of Economic Analysis. But that doesn't mean that other jobs aren't coming here from abroad. That's what this one is here, state insourcing jobs. Okay, so about 7.1 million Americans are working for foreign companies inside the United States, with the blue obviously showing that. So I think Minnesota looks like about 500,000 actually work for that, but I can't see that on that map. But again, very high numbers within that. Okay, so as a result, where have we kind of seen that? Okay, manufacturing jobs since the 1970s and 80s has kind of steadily declined. They rebounded a little bit during the Trump years due to the idea of the America First policies. And then over here, American manufacturing within cars and vehicles. What kind of work has stayed there? So the actual body part manufacturing has declined while the actual motor vehicles and bodies have actually stayed the same. Okay, but again, here's kind of our manufacturing has continually decreased for all the developed countries, at least as a whole, while for developing countries, it's stayed relatively the same. So when we talk about the percentage of clothing made in the United States, you can kind of see the gigantic drop of all these types of clothes. A lot of that, again, comes down to the fact that clothing manufacturing is labor intensive. It's not capital intensive because, again, the production of it actually isn't that expensive when the machinery involved. All right, so typically that means you have to pay your workers a higher percentage of what you're actually using for your expenses. So thus, if it's cheaper to pay somebody, here's the idea here. If the average for manufacturing is $10 to $15 in the United States for apparel manufacturing compared to Europe, it's 30, or China, India, where it's $1 to $2 a day, or sorry, $1 to $2 per hour. And I just kind of made up these numbers. On cost alone, if you're a business owner, who would you go with? Where is it going to be the most cost effective for you to make the biggest profit? It's going to be China and India. Okay. The higher quality, the more expensive stuff is still going to be made in the United States and within Europe. But again, that's only for the highest quality, the highest rated whatever that fits in there. I remember in 2012 or 2016 for the Olympics, you see, the Parade of Nations and all of these things, and, Americans come in with these really, really big, they fancy little suits and hats and all that, and it looks very, very old school in terms of what, you're supposed to dress up as, and, not really honoring culture necessarily, but honoring, the type of clothing that was made. And it was like $700 for each individual's just suit and hat that they came into the stadium with for the opening ceremony. Here was the worst part. It wasn't even made in America. We spent $700, let's do the math here quick. Okay, let's say it was $700 times about 500 athletes. Okay, that is $350,000, and it was made in France, produced in France. So that's something to consider. Okay, so we're going to skip this here on iPhone assembly and talk about this piece here that connects to NAFTA. So NAFTA is no longer a thing. We have essentially NAFTA 2.0, which is pretty much the same thing, not a whole lot of major changes. So NAFTA was not an organization, it was a treaty that was put forward in the early 90s between the United States, Canada, and Mexico, and now we have a new version of that, which essentially got rid of tariffs and trade barriers, much like with the EU, except between the United States and Canada and Mexico. So manufacturing, as a result, moved heavily to Mexico because now it was cheaper to do so, because now they didn't have to pay very high import tariffs on cars made in Mexico. It was now pretty much dirt cheap to do it. So rather than pay people in Detroit, Michigan, in Cleveland, Ohio, in St. Paul, Minnesota to make cars and produce them, now you could pay people in Mexico much cheaper wages to produce the same car for the same quality. And yeah, it's going to cost a little more to transport it back to the markets from the factories you just got rid of. But that actually makes it, again, comparatively way cheaper, again, due to the type of industry that it is. All right. And the factories that these are known as are maquiladoras. And so those are run by transnational companies. So think, again, think Chrysler, Ford, GMC. And I'm just throwing those names out there. I don't know if they actually participate in any of that. But those would be example companies that could possibly do it. Now, I don't know if they do, and I'm just using them as examples. So if I'm wrong, I do apologize for that. Because again, it's cheaper in Mexico due to lower site and situation factors. That includes lower wages and also looser environmental control restrictions and protections. So thus, you are able to pollute a little more. So you can kind of see the numbers that have gone up, the number of factories, the number of employees, the number of exports, and how that money goes back to Mexico. But again, a lot of that is lower wages. So you have to consider that as another piece of that. So inside of the United States, however, we've also seen a shift in manufacturing, again, away from kind of the Great Lakes, Northeast region, more towards the South. Where and why is that? Well, a lot of that, to talk about regional movement inside the United States, is it typically costs less in the South, what we now call, I can't say the Sun Belt, I don't know if that's the right term for it. But essentially the reason is because in the South, you typically have lower wages for workers, lower taxes, and also you have more lax rules on the idea of unions. So you also have greater access to oil and natural gas in the South now than you did in the North. So the union piece comes in. Also, we have the expansion of electricity and air conditioning, obviously, to make it a little bit more bearable. But then you also have what we call right-to-work states. So these are states that do not require workers to join unions. In some industries, in some states, you have to join a union in order to get a job working in certain industries, businesses, or factories. And that was typical what you'd see something in like Michigan working in the auto industries. You had to be a member of like the United Auto Workers. Now that is not a thing in many of these places. Because you have right-to-work states. So it's not as expensive to hire people to work in these industries, all right? Because typically union jobs pay more, and they have to pay them higher benefits and wages. And when you don't have to join a union, that actually lowers the cost. So a lot of states prefer to be right to work because it brings more jobs in, lower wages, but more jobs in total. So when that happens, due to outsourcing, places go through what we call deindustrialization, and that's when manufacturing jobs and income leave or go into decline. So other causes of deindustrialization and outsourcing. We have these ideas here. Again, we talked about right-to-work laws, comparative advantage and complementarity. Okay, so a comparative advantage is when a country or region produces items that has the greatest ratio of advantage in comparison to other areas. Which means if I'm really good at producing cars, I might, focus on just that and not focus on my other things. So this connects back to, our international development model with Rostow, because you focus on what you can build up really well, and then you use the money that you make as profit to help reinvest in other industries, hopefully. So that's kind of the same thing, is what are we really good at doing? Let's just focus on that, less on the other industries, let them kind of lag behind, struggle, but we can help benefit everybody else if we focus on this one good thing. And then with the idea of complementarity, okay, is when two countries or two or more countries each produce different goods because they know that they can benefit due to the other demands. So if I'm going to build cars, this person might be really good at producing oil and natural gas and gasoline for me to use for said cars. All right, so you benefit each other through those different unique resources, and that can be similar to a comparative advantage. But again, that means you might only be focusing on areas that you think you're going to do well in, where others are going to struggle, lag behind, people are going to go into unemployment, things of that nature. So here's kind of our right-to-work states within the red, and then forced unionized states, so where you have to work in that. So typically, again, more democratic states are more forced union, and then Republican conservative states more right-to-work. Then that comes down to this, I'm going to hit on real quick. Forest production is considered the lower skilled, where assembly line tasks are very similar. And then post-forest production is the more flexible, the higher skilled labor, because you're working in teams. You can do multiple different things and not just one task repeatedly. All right, so that's going to wrap up our talk here on production.